complain about Zach Pascal being here. I know he's a Nick
Now,
Sirianni
yeah, I'm
favorite.
starting to feel bad, Jody. It's not Zach's fault, but
hey, maybe that's what it is. That I know I'm kind of beating up on him, so it's swinging the pendulum for me a little bit. And then I take a deep breath and say, "No, this stinks. Zach Pascal's not a real wide receiver in the National Football League. He's a blocker." You're on the JAKIB Media YouTube channel. We appreciate you streaming in right off the top. You got Mac and Mac, John McMullen and Jody McDonald here with Hang With You. We got 2 hours of Bird Talk coming your way, including our buddy Chris Franklin from NJ.com, who is scheduled to join us in hour number 2 of today's program. Johnny Mac, I did go to your SI site. I'm sorry that I missed it. Dan Sileo yesterday had Frank Reich here on the JAKIB Media YouTube channel. And apparently Frank is like lost at sea without Zach Pascal. That Eagle wide receiver has landed here in Philadelphia, and that Zach Pascal is just going to tear apart that Colt offense without him in the fold. Yeah, you know, I've got my tongue firmly implanted in my cheek. But yes, that was a big move, and good for Dan being able to get Frank Reich on. He, of course, still very much in love with Nick Sirianni. They're buds, they're boys. Not surprised with the great first year he had. Frank Reich doing a good job pumping up the Philadelphia Eagles fans yesterday here on the channel.
Yeah, Dan went to school with Frank Reich way back in the day. They were teammates at Maryland, so they still have a relationship dating all the way back to the Maryland days. And then Dan transferred to Miami, became a star on that defensive line, the University of Miami, and that was a big time football program back then. So, yeah, he's been very close with Frank Reich for a really long time. But one thing, and Dan will tell you this, Frank Reich isn't going to insult anybody. So everybody was great. Now he legitimately loves Nick Sirianni. Don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about Nick Sirianni. I'm going to talk about the other guy. But, you know, I mean, Nick's not, he was talking up, Frank was still talking up Carson Wentz. How he loves him, and you know, that's just the way Frank is. I mean, he doesn't curse. He doesn't, you know, he's always going to take the optimistic bent on something, and he's always going to try to lift people up, as they say.
I'm pretty sure you and I discussed this on the show, but we didn't. If we didn't, let's do so quickly here. I believe that when Carson Wentz became an ex-Indianapolis Colt, the same way he became an ex-Philadelphia Eagle, that it was actually the owner's decision, that the general manager and the coach would have given Carson one more year. But the owner kind of twisted some arms there, and their owner is, people talk about Jeff Lurie all the time here in town. I think he's a pretty good balance of being involved and not being involved. It's a fine line the owners have to walk. You want an owner that cares, that isn't just, here, guys, run the football team. Let me count my billions of dollars. You want a guy who is motivated and on top of things, but you don't necessarily want a guy who's dictating football moves, because it's as much as Jeff Lurie might know football. I don't think he knows as much as guys who have been lifers like Howie Roseman. But the Colts owner, I think, is very much involved. And my read from afar was always that the owner kind of brought the hammer down and said, no, we got to get a better quarterback. Did you guys watch the last 2 games of the season when the playoffs were there for the taking and Carson Wentz couldn't grab them for us? I thought it was an owner's move, not a coach or a general manager move. Agree or disagree?
Agree with the owner being, you know, the fulcrum of the decision, no question. But I don't think it had as much to do with the poor play down the stretch as not getting vaccinated, the leadership stuff, not being able to practice, so you perform poorly. I think it had more to do with that than losing 2 games. As disappointing as it was, I do think it wasn't that hard to twist Chris Ballard's arm. It was probably a little bit more difficult to twist Frank's arm.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, I think it was probably 1.5 to 1. I don't think, and ultimately only the one guy matters. If he wants something done, it's got to be done. But I think, I think Ballard was more in, I don't think he had to do much convincing to get him on board. And Frank, Frank probably realized it had to be moved on as well. But I do think if it were up to Frank, he would have said, all right, let's give it one more try. I do think he would have defaulted to that. And as I said at the beginning, taking the more optimistic bent with Carson Wentz, and he'll be in the same system. And by the way, I think Frank wants a damn quarterback for more than a year. I mean, and this dates back to before him, and obviously in Andrew Luck, and every year a different quarterback. That's not a recipe for success. And it's one of the reasons Nick Sirianni got the job here, is because, he kind of spun that as, look, what we're able to do with a different quarterback each year. When he was there as the offensive coordinator, and they always put together a pretty good offense, no matter what. And, sometimes they had better quarterbacks. Phillip Rivers was still effective in his final year. Jacoby Brissett was, more of a climb that they had to build around. But they generally built around effective offenses, and they continue to do that. And I assume, Matt Ryan will be either the best quarterback Frank Reich has had or the second best, depending on how you grade him compared to Phillip Rivers in his final year. I think they're very similar, but Matt's probably got a little bit more juice, I think. So we'll see how that shakes out. He's going to play better than Carson Wentz, but they need a quarterback for more than 1 year.
Do you think they can squeeze 2 years of quarterback play out of Matt Ryan?
I think they can, but I thought they could out of Phillip Rivers, and he walked away. But and by the way, I think they could have squeezed 2 years. I think he could still play. It's not, for whatever reason, he decided, all right, that's it. And I think he still had another year in him. And you've heard probably the rumors of, hey, let's call Phillip Rivers, teams who get injured quarterbacks. And, same thing happened with Drew Brees in New Orleans when they had all the injuries. Everybody said, well, call Drew. And Drew's like, nah, I'm not coming back. You'd certainly be better, but
Drew had another gig that we actually knew about because we were seeing him on TV every single week. I got no idea what Phillip Rivers was doing.
High school coach.
I was going to say coaching up his high school kids. Yeah. So more power to him. He probably could have put that aside to rejoin the National Football League team.
If he wanted, he certainly could have, yeah.
Drew Brees wasn't going there. And they did talk yesterday on the show about Zach Pascal coming in here. John, I'm almost getting tired of listening to myself complain about Zach Pascal being here. I know he's a Nick Sirianni
Yeah, I'm starting to feel bad, Jody. It's not Zach's fault. But,
hey, maybe that's what it is. That I know I'm kind of beating up on him, so it's swinging the pendulum for me a little bit. And then I take a deep breath and say, no, this stinks. Zach Pascal's not a real wide receiver in the National Football League. He's a blocker. You and I discussed this quickly before the show started. When the first thing you say about a wide receiver is, wow, that guy can block, that's not good. That's a bad sign. That's the sign that he's not a good enough route runner. He's not a good enough ball catcher. He's not enough of a runner to get separation. I'm sorry. I'm more put off by the signing of Zach Pascal than I am excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, like you'll hear people say, Cooper Kupp is a great blocker, but that's like 57th on the list.
Right.
When it's number one, and Cooper Kupp is a great blocker, by the way, which is, it's an amazing player. But again, it's, well down the list. When that's your top traded receiver, and the Eagles fans have already been through this. They heard it with Riley Cooper when Chip Kelly was here. Oh, what a blocker. What a blocker. They've heard it with J.J. Arcega-Whiteside last year with Nick Sirianni. What a blocker. Going back to week one, you remember when the RPOs and the Arthur Smith and his head was on the swivel, didn't know what to do. What a great blocker J.J. is. Didn't touch the football once, I believe, in week one. Didn't get one target. And I remember, Nick Sirianni saying, well, we got to be cognizant, we can't, let everybody know that when JJ's on the field, we're just going to run the ball and we got to get him some touches. And he never got him some touches because it's difficult to get a player like that touches. I think Bo Wolf, we had on the show yesterday from The Athletic, described it pretty well, and that, okay, it's a slight upgrade compared to what you have. But this has me, again, Jody, it has me going down two routes I didn't want to go down. Route number one, they got to take another stinking wide receiver in the first round of the draft. Route number two, we got to cross our fingers and hope Jalen Reagor, some of the talent shines through and he finally gets it and develops into at least a Nelson Aguilar type receiver. I didn't want to go down either of those routes, but that's where I am. That's where I am. They can't line up. If you're telling me they're going to line up with Devontae Smith and Zach Pascal in the slot and Quez Watkins at the X receiver, that's not good enough.
No.
That's not good enough. And I hate they even mentioned Devontae Smith in this conversation. He should be set aside because Devontae's good enough. The other guys, no. I'm sorry. You're not helping the quarterback, I'll tell you that.
And I brought this up on my WIP show last night, and I got to get your thought on it as well. If this was just Nick Sirianni, that the wide receiver guru that he's supposed to be, having been a former wide receiver coach, having been a former wide receiver, some guys have so much belief in themselves that they'll talk themselves into, I'll take a guy who hasn't had success elsewhere, collegiate level, other NFL teams, and when I get my hands on him, I'm going to be able to elevate him. I'm going to be able to get stuff out of him that nobody else has. I can see the raw talent, and I'm going to be the one who's going to be able to tap into it. If that were the case, I guess I could understand the whole Zach Pascal thing. He thinks oh, by the way, he had Zach Pascal, and you know what he was? He was Zach Pascal. So I'm expecting him to come here and be Zach Pascal again. But at least I could understand that. This has been an Eagle thing going back to, I'll go back to even before Andy Reid. This is a Jeff Lurie, since Jeff Lurie's owned the Eagles thing, they just haven't been able to develop a superstar wide receiver. And it pains me to say that because I'm with you. You know how much I love Devontae Smith, did since he was a freshman at Alabama, as a matter of fact. But Deshaun Jackson was a very good wide receiver. He was a big play threat. We know every once in a while he'd catch a 60-yard bomb downfield. But his career after the real quick start kind of peaked and valleyed up and down, out of town, came back again, make a big play. Oh, guess what? Deshaun's hurt. And all the other wide receivers that have gone through here, including one Terrell Owens, that's the only time that an Eagle coach acknowledged, yes, we need a superstar wide receiver. We need to go out and get a guy, even though we know he's a pain in the butt and he's nuts and he's the definition of diva. I don't care. We need a superstar guy. He's the one guy. Johnny Mac, he's it. Since Jeff Lurie bought the Eagles, that they've had a superstar wide receiver. They got him either the draft or free agency with Terrell Owens. It was a trade. Is that an organizational philosophy thing? Or is that just happenstance and circumstance that the Eagles haven't been able to find a superstar wide receiver, one, in the last 25 years?
I think it's happenstance more than, say, linebacker in recent seasons or running back in recent seasons, because they've tried. They've used assets. They've used first-round picks. They've used second-round picks. Even if you want to go back to Nelson was a first-round pick. They've tried. For whatever reason, they haven't been able to develop receivers greatly. And I will say Deshaun at his height was pretty damn good. Now, and Jeremy Maclin had when those two were together, that was a darn good, for a small period of time, obviously. But in more recent history, if you start with Nelson and as a first round pick, and disappointment, and maybe less of a disappointment because of the Super Bowl, and ironically, probably his best game was in the Super Bowl. That's when the stars are aligning. when a guy who's a disappointment has his best game in the Super Bowl, and all of a sudden the stars align, you win Super Bowl 52. But then, Jalen Reagor, obviously, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside before him. The only reason Devontae Smith is here is because Jalen Reagor failed. Let's be honest. If Jalen Reagor didn't fail, they're not going for a receiver in back-to-back years. And now you can argue if it extends further, the only reason they'd be taking a wide receiver again is because Jalen Reagor failed. So you have this self-fulfilling prophecy of not being able to develop players over the years. But I do think they've tried. It's evidence. And even this offseason, they've tried to trade for Calvin Ridley. And they were in on the bidding for some better receivers. But I think the real issue is, they can't develop receivers, and this spans multiple coaching regimes and multiple personnel people. It's weird almost that they can't, especially in this era where you'll go on and you'll hear whoever your favorite draft person is. You'll hear them talk about, it's so easy to find receivers now because of the way the college game is played, and they shifted things, and you can find a receiver deep in the draft. Well, the Eagles can't find a damn receiver. And they're talking about Zach Pascal. So, a lot of it to me is, and I've talked about Nick mentioning and, other people mentioning, and I think I mentioned yesterday on the show, I was just texting with somebody talking about how these young receivers aren't doing what they're supposed to do when it comes to sight adjustments or running routes or being in the spot they're supposed to be in. And that can really affect a quarterback. I mean, if a quarterback is ready to throw the ball and the receiver's not there, that's an issue if the receiver's not where he's supposed to be. And then all of a sudden the quarterback starts to, have it in the back of his mind. He's concerned, and maybe that's some of the reason Jalen Hurts is hesitant to pull the trigger at the time. I'm not trying to defend Jalen Hurts, but I'm saying you got to throw that into the hopper as well when you say, okay, who's affecting who? Is Jalen Hurts affected because of the bad receivers, or are the receivers affected because the quarterback can't get him the ball? I don't think anybody knows the true, complete answer to that because it's more nuanced than that.
Right. Chances are it's a combination of the two. And the coach, you would believe, was the one who should know the best if there is more of the responsibility on one side than the other. And to this point, here's how they've reacted. They've signed Zach Pascal. Again, if that's what we're going to hang our hat on, Zach Pascal, he understands how to play the position. Well, hasn't he understood how to play the position and hasn't had a...
And I'll go back real quick, Jody. I'll go back to your point about Nick Sirianni because coaches do have egos. And as you bring up, coaches will say, well, if I can get this guy, he's already had Zach. He knows what Zach Pascal is. And by the way, to Nick Sirianni's credit, Zach Pascal's never been better than he was with Nick Sirianni. But that ain't good. That ain't good.
Well, then that would make me ask this question, because I've seen a couple people who are trying to put a positive spin on things. Well, his season went backwards last year because of Carson Wentz. That's why Zach Pascal, who's never been a world beater, but even what was the number you threw out there yesterday? 115 wide receivers?
113 out of 115.
113 out of 115. Well, which is it? It was all Carson Wentz's fault, or he didn't have Nick Sirianni. Yeah, I guess there's explanations.
Well, and then I went back because I got that, as you can imagine, Jody. I got the same thing you got, and they started because they don't like Carson now. And they started it was Carson Wentz. And so I went back. All right, let me check back to the year prior. And Nick Sirianni was there, obviously. 94 out of 127. Now, Better.
Well, that's better.
It is better.
That's only not good enough. That's not flat out stinks.
That's flat out stinks. It's just flat out not bottom of the barrel stinks. But 94 out of 127. I'll remind you, Jody. Jalen Reagor was 90 out of 127 that same year. 90. Jalen Reagor was supposedly better, at least to the people that watched the film. And that's the apex of his career, again, with Nick Sirianni. So Nick had, to Nick's credit, he's gotten more out of Zach Pascal than anybody else, but he didn't get a lot out of Zach Pascal.
No,
you don't want the 94th best receiver. Think about it, 32 teams. Everybody wants to play 11 personnel. All right, that's 96. You're like the worst starting receiver, basically, if you want to use 3 as starters in the NFL. Is that where you want to be?
Except for 3 would be 90 some odd, and last year he was 113th out of 150.
Yeah, I'm saying with
he's
Nick,
playing more than 3, and he still
Nick,
can't get off the bottom of the pile. I have 2 things, Johnny Mac, before we get our first break in here. Number one is, so you're telling me the Eagles aren't making another wide receiver move in free agency? We've still got 5 weeks to the draft, 5 weeks tomorrow it'll be. And yes, we're going to start to scrutinize those wide receivers that could go in the first round with the Eagle pick at either 15, 16, or 19. But if that's the case, we've already turned the page. This is it. Zach Pascal is there. One free agent signing at the wide receiver position. That sure as hell scares me. If not, you're going to tell me is there another mediocre guy? There's no other star guy left. There's no other major move the needle guy left. They're all gone. But is there anyone else they could add just from a quantity standpoint? And talking about former Eagle wide receivers, educate me here. All pro status. Not Pro Bowl, because I always get my nose out of joint about the Pro Bowl because so many guys make it and then decide not to go, and a guy gets elevated and he goes from alternate to being on the team. That it's not as big an indicator certainly as Pro Bowl status. All pro status. 3 wide receivers now on the team? Because they still have a fullback on the Pro Bowl, which I think is borderline ludicrous. But when they put out all pro teams, is it 3 wide receivers deep?
I believe it's still 2. I have to double check.
Okay. Then do me a favor, which you can look up during the break.
But here's the thing with all pro, Jody. The guys vote, so whatever, there's like 50 votes. So they can vote for whoever they want. In other words, if some guy gets 33 and some guy gets 22 and some guy gets 21 and some guy gets 19, well, generally they go first and second team. So they'll have second team all pro. They never go to third team. They don't say people are third team all
first and second team, right?
So in other words, if 4 guys don't get votes, there's not 4 second team all pro receivers. So if only 3 guys get votes, so if there's a really dominant player who's going to get 50 out of 50, like Cooper Kupp, there's not going to be a lot of room. Obviously, you got to vote for the second guy. There's not going to be a lot of room to have different. So it's a really difficult honor. That's why All Pro is far more meaningful, as you mentioned, than Pro Bowl. So it's a really, really difficult honor. But yeah, other than Terrell Owens, the Eagles haven't had anybody in that range.
Deshaun Watson would not have Deshaun Jackson would not have made an all-pro team.
No. Yeah, he was.
That's the point I was getting
I'll look it up. Actually, second team, 2009.
He did make one second team?
Yeah, second team, 2009.
Well,
I knew that's where you're going, so I looked it up real quick.
Yes,
so
that's exactly where I was going. So we give Deshaun the nod. I didn't know that he'd ever made it an all-pro team. John, that's pretty weird. I know it's a small group and it's the best of the best, the creme de la creme. But if we go back to when Jeff Lurie bought the team, 93, what year did Lurie buy the team? 92, 93? I should know that off the top of my head. I know it's sometime early 90s.
95, right when Ray, so 95, somewhere in that range, yeah.
Okay. Well, really, I was on the air for 5 of the Norman Bremen years. I remember them unfondly, but I thought they were actually less than that. Before the 95 season, all right, I'll believe that that's the case. Do the math. That's that's almost 30 years. And the Eagles have had one Pro Bowl wide receiver, that and all pro wide receiver. No, two, because Deshaun did make it once. I'm sorry, I have a tough time finding that to be a coincidence. There's got to be
94 is the official year.
94. Okay,
94.
That's very few all-pro wide receivers.
And by the way, you're right, because it looks like, and I'm double checking, Deshaun made it as a punt returner that year.
So really?
Yeah. So he didn't even make it as a wide receiver. So you're right. I mean, now again, that's the tippy top. That's the green. It's really difficult to be
right. And I wouldn't expect a lot, but we're talking about 24 years. If you're talking about 5-year period, all right, well, they didn't have one. They had a guy who was close. 10-year period, all right, they just missed a 15, 20, 25, 25 plus one. Terrell Owens. That's it. And it's not going to be Zach Pascal. Zach is not jumping to the top and grabbing that spot.
Wow, that was a year. So Deshaun was actually a first-team punt returner and a second-team kickoff returner that year.
But not as a
not
wide
a receiver.
Okay.
And it is 3 receivers. So it was that year was Andre Johnson, Wes Welker, Larry Fitzgerald were first team. Second team was Reggie Wayne, Brandon Marshall, and that's it. So
okay, so they had, but even though they had 3 on the first team, they had 2 on the second team. So it does depend on how many votes you get. But if that's 5 wide receivers, you're 5 wide receiver deep. The Eagles could, in almost 30 years, only get 1 wide receiver into the, and I'm sure, well, maybe back in the 90s, they were going mostly 3 wide receiver set by the 90s, certainly by the turn of the century, 2000. That's not a whole heck of a lot of uber talented wide receivers in this town.
No, there hasn't been. Like, I'm fine at the apex of Deshaun and Jeremy Maclin. I mean, that's plenty good enough. There have been the short windows. Obviously, when T.O. was here, even when Alshon was here the first year, and he was injured and he played through basically a torn labrum the entire year, he was really effective, and obviously a big part of the Super Bowl. And Nelson Aguilar got a little bit better. That was even palatable. It's not great, but it's okay. The part that is, just not acceptable is what we've gone through the past few seasons, especially in this era, Jody. I mean, you go back to 94, okay, when it was a different era. The game was played in a different way. Now it's much easier to throw the football. It's never been easier to throw the football. And you see these explosive numbers, and you'll hear people say, why is Lynn Swann in the Hall of Fame? Why is John Stallworth in the Hall of Fame? Why is Paul Warfield in the Hall of Fame? All these great receivers from bygone eras. Even, people start talking about Jimmy Smith. That's a name, because he had such phenomenal numbers. And now it's even better for the younger receivers now, exploding. I always joke, you're a baseball guy. So, the number 714 and 755 meant so much for so long, for obvious reasons. And now I can't even tell you what the number is. Because it doesn't matter to me. And football's not as much as a statistical game as baseball is, but still, I remember when Herman Moore, I think, set I think it was 122, and it just stuck out to me. And I said, that's unbelievable. 122. No, it's who cares? A bunch of guys are over 100. A bunch. It's so easy to find receivers, and they can't find a stinking receiver. It's amazing to me. with the exception of Devontae Smith.
Who was the Lion quarterback who threw the ball?
Probably Scott Mitchell. Scott Mitchell,
man, he was supposed to go and save Detroit too. How'd that work out?
He got big money at the time.
He sure as hell. I remember being at the vet for a Scott Mitchell in for Dan Marino game in which he played.
That's probably where he earned his money.
Exactly. I happened to be at the vet that day and said, all right, this guy's going to get overpaid. I was kind of ahead of the curve on that one. And the Lions were the team that fell prey. All right, he's John McMullen. I'm Jody McDonald. We've still got an hour and a hay to play with you today, including a visit with our buddy Chris Franklin from NJ.com. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about the salary cap. Is that a deterrent to the Eagles not getting a major upgrade at wide receiver? A lot of good wide receivers have changed teams this free agent year. Is it because the Eagles just thought that the player's contract was too big, the price was too much? I do want to talk to John about where they sit with the salary cap now. Harry Roseman's done some nice things to make cap slots available, but he hasn't turned around and reinvested that money just yet. That's what we'll talk about next year on Birds 365.